We're in the midst of a study on the subject of prayer. Technically, the study is on prayer in Providence. We just haven't got to the Providence part of that conversation yet. We've been focused on the prayer aspect of this study, and ultimately, Lord willing, if we have time to get to the end of this study, we'll talk a little more about the Providence side of that, how the two go hand in hand, and how they work together. But the early studies, the early lessons in this series have been focused on how it is that we should pray and why it is that we should pray and who we're praying to and the importance of it and just general conversations related to those kinds of things. And so we want to continue that. If you have your lesson sheets, we're in session 4. I'll show it to you on the screen as well. And we really, and I say session 4, we're really at the very last thing in session 4. We talked about these models, these examples of prayer on Sunday, and I wanted to get to the last one on the list, which is in 1 Chronicles chapter 4 and verses 9 and 10. Just didn't have time to do it on Sunday. So let's look at that example in 1 Chronicles 4, and then we'll move into session 5 and talk more in detail about that. And while we're opening our Bibles, Zach, you do me a favor and run back there in that rack where the lessons are, the lesson sheets are, and just bring me that stack of lessons that's in that bin. Thank you. 1 Chronicles chapter 4 and in verse 9. Who are we talking about here? A man by the name of Jabez or Jabez, you choose, however you want to pronounce that name. And notice that there is a description of him. What's the description? He's more what? An honorable man, right? One of the qualifications that he had that obviously made him honorable was that he did understood the importance of prayer, communication with his Creator. He seems to come from a pretty what kind of background? Well, notice the description. He said at the end of verse 9, he says that speaking of his mother, saying, "Because I bear him what? Was sorry." He comes into this world in a difficult way. Now, we don't know exactly what those things might have been, but that's the description that's given there in verse 9. And then there's this really, really, in many senses, very short, brief prayer. There's a book, I think, out that's called The Prayer of Jabez. And it's interesting read, but I've always found fascinating that we were able to get a book out of one verse, but that's the way men are sometimes, right? We can take one verse and go and go and go and go and go. But anyway, here's this moment in time that he speaks, and he says, Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that thou wouldest do what? Bless me indeed." Or he wants to be blessed with the Creator. Now, I don't believe that his disposition is selfish. I don't believe this is gimme, gimme, gimme kind of prayer. I don't think that's what we're seeing here. What I believe we're seeing is a man who recognizes the blessings come from whom? Blessings come from God. Now that's interesting, right? We say that all the time. We say all the time about how God blesses us, or we need the blessings of God, we need the care of God. And if that be true, if we actually do need the blessings of God, if we actually do need the care that comes from God, then we ought to be talking to Him about it, right? We ought to be communicating with Him about those things, recognizing that He's the one that's going to bless us. If He is the giver of all good things, and I want good things, I need to be talking to Him about it. I need to be praying to Him concerning those matters. And so he goes to the Creator of all things and asks Him to bless him and enlarge my coast, which simply means expand the profitability, right? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I heard something. Okay, it borders, right? Expand my. Give me profitability. Yeah, give me the ability to go beyond, in some senses, in terms of prosperity, what I have right now. But coupled with that, what's the next phrase? Yeah, and that thy hand might be with me. Proverbs teaches give me neither. As soon as I thought it went out of my head. Give me neither prosperity or, bless my heart, poverty. Thank you. I couldn't think of it. But give me neither poverty nor riches. There we go. I knew it would come back. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Put me somewhere in the middle. Because poverty has its own set of what? Problems and challenges and temptations. Okay? And great wealth has its own set of problems, difficulties, and temptations. So he says, put me somewhere between those two. Don't put me at either extreme that might provide or create certain levels of temptation. So this man asks for benefit. He asks for blessings. He asks for broadened borders, more territory, if you will, greater possession. But with it, he understands that I want the hand of God guiding me the whole way. Don't ask God to bless us without also asking His guidance to handle those things. When we ask Him to bless us and benefit us and provide for us, then in the very same breath, the example of Jabez here is that we also acknowledge, Lord, then give me the wisdom to be wise with it. Give me the wisdom to be a good steward. The problem is that so many, once they receive the blessings, do what? Forget about where they came from. Great example in the New Testament within parable form. Who was that? Right? Okay, that's one example. The one I'm thinking about who squanders is prodigal son. In parable form, the prodigal son, remember, he's given all the blessings, the inheritance that he should have waited for, and he squanders it away. And he forgets the father in the picture. In the parable, he forgets the father who gave it. When he hits rock bottom, he says, what? I will go and tell my father that I've sinned, I've wronged him. And so be careful with our blessings. And it's perfectly suitable and right and just for us to ask of God to benefit us. But in the same breath, be sure that we also ask Him to give us guidance and wisdom to use those things. And in the next breath, and that thou wouldest what? Yeah, keep me from evil. Keep me prosperity, but don't let it lead me to things that I shouldn't be involved in. And Lord, keep me away from evil. From a more generic sense, we talked a little bit about that in relationship to the model prayer that Jesus gave us, right? He said, lead us not into temptation. Same kind of prayer here. The job is that don't let me get into evil. The best way to avoid the consequences of sin is to avoid the evils that lead us to it, right? The best way to avoid the dangers and the challenges that sin is just don't even go that path. Jesus understood that. Lead us not into temptation. He understands it, this writer does, by even asking the Lord to help keep him. Not get me out of trouble, Lord. Keep me from it to begin with. And that's something that all of us should probably pray more about. Go ahead, Roger. Talk about it.
This situation was Lot.
Yeah.
He chose to take the rich side. Yeah. And where did he end up? Yeah. All kinds of evil.
Yeah, because he didn't want to just be blessed, but he chose a path that would not just bring him prosperity, but put him in the fire. That put him in the fire of the evil that was around him, where, especially when you recognize where he decided to pitch his tent, where he decided to reside. And that's what, in essence, what he's asking for. Broaden my borders, but if it means having to go into evil to get there, then keep me from that. I don't desire prosperity to the point that it would put me in harm's way.
This, Tom used the word harm. NIV uses the word harm. Did you look? Well, I did. The evil has a different group here. To me, the evil and harm has two different meanings.
Yeah, I did not in the moment, but I can take a fast look. And all I'm seeing is the same kind of words that we would think of, depending on whether you're talking about a noun. But evil, this word's translated as bad sometimes. It's translated as evil sometimes. It's translated, I keep moving my pen, adversity, affliction, calamity, displeased, distress, evil, grief, harm. All of these words are part of the defining word, the original word that's there. And so it's one of those words that has apparently such a broad sense to it that translators just search in some senses, trying to figure out what is the most accurate English word. But I think that in some ways harm might be part of this process, because he's saying, broaden my borders, help me gain the benefit of blessing. But if it means putting myself in evil's path or in harm's way, then that's not worth that. It's not worth that to me. That's what I see.
The next phrase kind of points
Yeah.
that out, but not cause me pain.
Right. Exactly. Right. That it may not grieve me. Prosperity with grief and sorrow and trouble really isn't worth it. And that's the point. And so when he prays, he wants the Father to recognize, and even within himself to recognize that whatever it is that I'm be blessed with, I don't let it be in such a fashion that I have to put myself in evil's path or harm's way, or something that would grieve me at the end of it all.
You got to be careful what we do with the blessings God gives us. You don't want to squander them, I guess you could say.
And stewardship, I think, is within the envelope of what he's praying for here. To have guidance and strength from God to know how to deal with the blessings that are provided. But the benefit, or the thought process in all of that, though, in our context of study, is that we're praying about all these things. Pray that we avoid the temptations of placing myself in evil and harm's way just to gain some benefit. Pray about leading us and being guided by the thoughts and processes of God, even when it comes to the prosperity and blessings of life that we see. All of these things need to be part of a prayer life, and that's the point of sharing this text within our study.
I think the word also that be not pain to your name up the cross of any sorrow.
Yeah.
After all, he's asking everything he's asking for, that needs to keep him from evil or harm, but it would also keep him from sorrow.
Yeah.
That would catch up with him.
Right. And that has caught up with lots of folks. Lots of folks have asked God for blessings, and there are times where God says, and God granted our request, but sent leanness into our hearts. God said, okay, if that's really what you want, but you have to face the challenges and consequences of those kinds of decisions. And certainly this man seems to be desirous of God's guidance as the blessings would come. And the end result was what? God grant to him. God benefited him. Go ahead, Gary.
It seems to me that Jabez in his prayer is acknowledging God to be the true center of his life.
Yeah.
In every way.
Yeah. All the blessings and benefits that are on their way, he knows who he needs to be talking to, conversing with, and communicating with about.
Similar statement about Jesus deliver us from evil in prayer.
Yeah. Keep us away from it. It's not, whatever it is I might be seeking, it's not worth that. It's not worth creating consequence or placing myself in temptation's path in order to get there. And the truth of the matter is, when it comes to prosperity, how many anecdotal examples could we give you of people who willingly and knowingly placed their souls in jeopardy because they felt it would bring them some kind of financial benefit? And that's a mistake that many have made, and this man seems to be praying, Lord, don't let me go that path. Broaden my borders, but not by any means. Broaden them in righteous ways. And obviously it seems to be connected to the approval of God, because God granted him the request. And so I don't think you would have this final sentence of that if God had not thought of his prayer as being within righteous framework.
God knows what we need before we even ask.
Yeah. And yet still wants us to ask. And that's been kind of one of the interesting aspects of our study is that we figure out a way to balance the fact that God knows everything before I ask it, but still wants me to ask it. And the truth of the matter is, we can understand that concept. There are a lot of things that my children don't recognize that I already know, right? But I want them to communicate. I want them to communicate with me. I know certain things about them, and they wouldn't necessarily have to tell me, but I want them to communicate with me. And that's the sense that God the Father has as well. Though He knows it, He still desires that we communicate those things with Him. Any other thoughts about that text? All right, grab your next session out, and I'll pass some of these down through here so you guys can take a look at this as well. You got that one. Okay. Anybody else that hadn't grabbed a copy? It's part of the set. If you've got the set, you've got it. I'm not giving you anything new. Pass it down to you. Thank you. I try to keep single lessons we're on as we go through. Okay, so we want to turn our attention to one of the most difficult aspects of prayer. And that is when we don't like the what? We don't like the answer. It's hard, right? It's hard. It's hard to know how to respond or react when we don't like the answer. And it's not uncommon or unusual to hear people talk about how they poured their heart and soul out before the Creator and either received a no or be patient or my grace is sufficient for thee or various responses. And the fact of the matter is all responses to prayer are not yes. That's what we want, right? We in many senses that's what we desire. And we have to be honest about that, by the way, because if we're not honest about the fact that really what I want God to do is just to say yes to everything, then we won't appreciate how it is we can work past that. Let's admit the problem. The problem is that I want a yes to everything. And the truth of the matter is we want a yes to everything, or why would we what? Why would we ask it to begin with? Okay? So the truth is we're desirous of positive responses, but they don't always come in positive ways. And we need to discuss that now within the framework of this lesson. Go ahead, Ron.
One of the best examples I can think of that is the Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
His request was not granted. He prayed thrice for it.
Yeah. And
there was a reason for that, though.
Yeah.
And we don't always understand that reason.
And we're a little out ahead of ourselves a little bit, but he is a perfect illustration of that. Paul did get an answer to his prayer. The answer was, my grace is sufficient for thee. The answer was, no, I won't fix that physical ailment. My grace is sufficient for thee. And that's the tricky part for us, is recognizing that prayer, in many senses, was answered, even though we don't think so because it wasn't answered in the fashion that I wanted it to be. And that's the balance we have to strike somehow with our prayer life, is to recognize our role in this relationship is to communicate and to pour our heart and soul out before the Father, recognizing His power, recognizing who He is as a Father, all those characteristics and qualities we've been studying. At the end of the day, then, the final result is I have to accept His what? His answer, right? No matter what it is, whether it's be patient, whether it's yes, whether it's no, or whether it's, yeah, I'll give you that, and here's a little extra. Because there are a lot of times in life that's exactly what He does as well. Go ahead.
As earthly parents, we understand the rule. We don't give our children everything. Well, if you do,
Yeah. And that's the grandparents' job anyway. Ruin them. But you're right. We doesn't. The relationship's very similar, and there's a reason for that we have an appreciation for who God the Father is, because we have these earthly connections that help us kind of see it and give us illustration to it. Go ahead, Randy. I'm sorry.
I guess another thing to think about in this is we tend to think of God as I'm praying to God. So in a sense we become, I want to say selfish, but that's really what it is. I need, or can you help me with, and I'll be honest with you, right now with what our family's going through, and we've done enough crying and all that, but we're all praying for Dad to get better. But what if he was praying to go home?
Yeah.
And my prayer wasn't answered. He didn't. But God can't answer every prayer, yes, because every prayer's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And there's a movie, Bruce Almighty, which I get a kick out of, because he's got this computer and he's got all his prayers just going through it, and he gets irritated. And so he just hits yes for everything. And then all of a sudden the $700 million Powerball jackpot split between 700 million people, and they all get $1. And everybody's mad because, everybody got what they wanted. They won the lottery. But it wasn't what they wanted. They just wanted it for them. So we have to remember that when we're praying, there's other people that are in that situation. So the answer may not always be what we want. It would be very easy for us as a family to say, God didn't answer our prayer. I don't want anything to do with it anymore. But we have to understand that there were other prayers that could very well have been answered in this situation.
Right. In that situation, it replicates among all kinds of circumstances. And we have to kind of be prepared for the fact. But that's an interesting picture to kind of remember is that there are lots of prayers being put before the throne of God. And the truth of the matter is there are lots of people praying about the very same circumstance sometimes, but we don't always know the heart of all those people. And what they're asking may vary depending on who it is. And that's an interesting dynamic of this that we at least have to appreciate about God.
Sometimes there is a blessing in unanswered prayers. That maybe He knows better what we want, what we should have, what we're asking.
There should never be any point that I think God failed in His responses, because that is an implication that I'm smarter than Him. And that is never going to be true. Let's go to Habakkuk. I think Habakkuk's a great book to kind of learn this from. The very things that we're talking about. Habakkuk chapter 1. I've probably been in the book of Habakkuk just maybe twice more than I've been in the book of Ruth. Those who were here the other night remember. I have to tell you this real quick. I'll probably get in trouble. He may be watching right now. But Jeff Smith out in Texas sometimes catches if he's in between work issues or whatever. But anyway, he saw the lesson on Ruth. The night I preached Ruth, and I told you that I realized that I'd been here 5 years and never preached a sermon out of the book of Ruth. And he wrote me a text that night when I got home and said, "So you're saying for the first 5 years your preaching was ruthless?" And so and he said, "I'm sure Roger has probably already said that to you." So anyway, let's go to the book of Habakkuk. Here's kind of a neglected book, but there's a very valuable lesson here within the context. He said, "The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity, and cause me to behold grievance? For spoiling and violence are before me, and there are that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law was slacked, and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Behold ye among the heathen in regard, and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you." I'm going to stop there for a minute. What's Habakkuk saying?
He's been praying, and all this trouble's going on, and God never answers.
Yeah, there are problems at every side. I look around, and all I see is violence and iniquity and sin and challenge and hurt. And how long? I want to be honest with you. We've all been there, where we're praying before the throne of God, and we're saying, how much longer do I have to continue to bear this? How much longer do I have to carry? Notice the early description. It's an interesting way to start a book, isn't it? The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. The world that he was living in, and the circumstances and the condition of God's people was troubling him and had become a burden. And he's wailing before the throne of God. And basically his conclusion at the point of verse 2 is, how long shall I cry and you're not hearing me cry? All the condition that's going on all around me. The law was slacked. Judgment doth never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. We can't get a righteous judge to make a righteous decision. Every time the righteous want to stand up, the wicked tend to encompass them about and overrule what the righteous are trying to challenge folks to do. Habakkuk's in a very challenged, distressful circumstance as he sees the condition of the people. But now look what God says in verse 5. Behold ye among the heathen in regard and wonder marvelously. For I will work a work in your days which you will not believe, though it be told you. Habakkuk, I've been listening to you. Not only have I been listening to you, I have seen the same things you have seen. And if you don't think that I haven't, I am going to do a work among you, the people, that you wouldn't believe it even if I told you. Habakkuk, if I had answered your prayer in the fashion you wanted me to, you wouldn't have got it anyway. You wouldn't have understood and believed it if I had declared it to you. In those early moments of you crying before my throne, I was listening. You weren't ready for what I was about to say. For, lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. They are terrible and dreadful. Their judgment and their dignity shall proceed of themselves. Their horses also are swifter than the leopards, and are more fierce than the evening wolves. And their horsemen shall spread themselves, and their horsemen shall come from far. They shall fly as the eagle that hasteth to eat. They shall come all for violence. Their faces shall sup up as the east wind, and they shall gather the captivity as the sand. And they shall scoff at the kings, and the princes shall be a scorn unto them. They shall deride every stronghold, for they shall heap dust and take it. Then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. God tells Habakkuk, this is going to be different than anything you would ever would imagine. Do you think when Habakkuk prayed, Lord, why are you tolerating your children's behavior? That's what he's saying. Why are you tolerating? I'm crying out because there's no justice. There is lawlessness everywhere. People are violent towards one another, and there's been no resolve. And then the next thing God finally says to him is, okay, I'm sending the Chaldeans, and they're more violent than anybody you've ever experienced before. They come in with power and strength, the likes of which it's hard to even fathom. And here's the odd part, God says at the end of verse 11. I'm going to let them do all this, even to the point of letting them give credit to whom? Their gods. We don't always know how God's going to respond to certain things. So be careful. Be careful how we think about whether He's reacted or not reacted, because what He's actually about to do may be completely different than what we ever imagined. Go ahead.
These verses are speaking to me in this way, so I may be off task, but I can think of 4 people that when faced with adversity changed it towards being stronger in God, coming back to God, or returning to God. And I think of your dad, and I think of Dad. They didn't let those things that they had to go through physically turn them away.
Sure.
It made them stronger, and they found ways to work through that adversity and continue to work for the Lord.
And I'll take your analogy one step further, if I may. That some people learned to work through adversity even when it got worse, when they asked for it to get better. And that's Habakkuk, right? Because he asked for it to get better. Fix the lawlessness of your people. God says, okay, I'm going to send the Chaldeans to do it. And Habakkuk goes, whoa, 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 right? Not at all what I thought. God sent, in some senses, another level of adversity in order for the right results to eventually happen. And that's what's hard sometimes. When we think we hit rock bottom, somebody takes a sledgehammer and makes a new bottom, right? And that happens sometimes. And the great question for us in those moments is, am I going to let that shake me or reshape me in God's image? And that's the and Habakkuk's going to have to deal with that. He's going to have to deal with that. Go ahead.
Saying that if you don't know history, you will repeat it. Yeah. Don't get off politically, but our nation is heading in the same direction.
Yeah. All nations of all times, irregardless of when, need to take light of what he's saying. That in any nation of people can find themselves at such a point where God says, "Okay, I'm ready for a restart," and still has the right and power to do that. And so all nations should take heed and warning of thoughts of God.
Verse 4,
Uh-huh.
the law is powerless.
Yeah.
Is he saying that they had corrupted the laws to the
Yeah.
point where they just ignored it?
Yeah, it didn't mean anything to them. Yeah, I think it didn't mean anything to them. If you're willing to just ignore the laws and rules that God had established, it's powerless. Not in that God is powerless, but they allowed for it to become powerless because, it'd be like putting a speed limit sign out here that says 35, but everybody drives 100 and doesn't care. And the law doesn't. Those who enforce the laws don't care. That's the problem they have. Is they've disregarded the law, and even the judges and rulers over the law don't care either. And that's the condition they find themselves. But notice what he says in verse 12. Art thou not from everlasting? Well, these Chaldeans, that's the answer? Are you not ever, oh Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die. That's not what I asked for. I didn't ask for destruction of the people. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment. That's what I'm asking for. Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. I was asking you just to straighten this out. Not come in here with the Chaldeans. Thou art of purer eyes than to behold evil. And canst not look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou upon them that deal treacherously? And holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he. You know what's interesting about Habakkuk here? His first thought is, God, you're not what? You're not listening. His second problem is, God, you're giving the wrong answer. Okay, first you're not listening to me. Now you're not giving the right answer. Guilty. Right? We're guilty of that. Sometimes. We're guilty of the same thing. At times on a national scale as a collective, but as an individual, we're guilty of that sometimes. We thought he wasn't paying attention. The answers didn't come the way we thought. And now I'm questioning his ability to make wise decisions. Habakkuk's running a wide array of thought processes here. And he just keeps going with his description of these people and the difficulties they shall bring. But here's what I love about him. Let's jump to chapter 2. I want to look at just one verse. I think we'll do it. So, first statement Habakkuk makes, why are you not listening? Why are you not dealing with these things? Then he hears how God's going to deal with it. No. I just wanted some correction. I don't want the Chaldeans to come in and wreck everything. But now watch verse 1. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me. And what I shall answer when what? I am reproved. Our initial response may be negative about Habakkuk because he seems to be calling God into question, and in some senses he is. But the summation, the end statement that Habakkuk makes is, I realize I'm not talking wisely here. And so I have spoken my concerns. I have expressed my difficulties with first his unwillingness to hear in his eyes, and secondly, the answer that he brought, I'm going to bring the Chaldeans. But now I'm going to sit back and I'm going to wait for reproof. Sometimes we have difficulty avoiding that moment where, for at least maybe an instant, we challenge the decision-making of our Creator. And when we find ourselves in that moment, in the next breath, we should pause and say to our Father, reprove me, Lord. I have spoken beyond what I should have. I've spoken my words. I need to step back and wait for his answer that Habakkuk fully expects to be a reproof of his mindset through all these things. So sometimes when we don't get the answers we expect, or sometimes not only do we not get the answer, but we get a worse answer in our minds than what we had before. And we're tempted to call God's judgment and wisdom and character into question because of it. Take pause and remember this prophet, who in the midst of that for himself stood back and said, now I'll wait for the reproof. God's going to correct me on this, and I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to listen to it. Go ahead, Robert.
It might help us to understand this better if we realize the time frame, which is between about 620 to 605 BC, and understand what was really happening. And I think another term for the Chaldean would be the Babylonians.
Yeah.
And so that lets you know what is really coming. And that's where again when he got his answer.
Right. And we know the truth about all that when you study the entire history of how God used them, but even they were punished for the way they dealt and treated with people. It is not as if God was giving them license to be lawless and violent, and God simply used the very character they were choosing to deal with one issue, but he also deals with them later, directly deals with Nebuchadnezzar at times too.
I think when we put Habakkuk in our own lives, he actually is getting the answer he wants. He wants Israel to be cleansed, however you want to put it. God's just going about it in a much different way. And I know as we've been thinking about Jack and our dad, I can't think about Jack without our dad. And we often pray for Dad to get better, but the real prayer was take his pain. And he did that, but not in the way we thought he was going to do that. We got the answer, but it was the means by which the answer came wasn't how we thought, how we pictured it.
And that's the whole point of this whole conversation. So it's a common thing. And though we're personalizing it, but let's walk away from the personalization for a minute. It's common. It's a common issue for everybody who finds themselves in very similar kinds of circumstances. We're facing it.
Being human, we have preconceived ideas of how God should act, how God, and that's what Habakkuk was looking at here. He wanted to straighten up Israel from within, where God has a world view, and so he's going to use the people without to threaten the life and the livelihood and the culture of Israel so that they would actually finally value it and turn back to it. And so the problem is universal, and it's throughout all of mankind that God doesn't act the way that we think he ought to, and so we get upset.
And I'll take your thought just one step further, in that being human, we have chosen to be trained in false ideas about how God works and functions. And if we would let the Bible train us as to how God functions and works, then we would understand these things in a better way. But we've been programmed by other humans who have their ideas of how God should work and how it shouldn't work. And because of that, we get these odd thought processes of how God should function. And when He doesn't meet our created expectations, then we're upset. And that's a difficulty that we have to overcome sometimes.
Ryan, so many of our prayers are, for sake of another word, selfish prayers. That it's take care of this person, relieve their pain, help me to help them in some way, or be with the surgeons or whatever. Let it rain, and the kid next door say, "Don't let it rain, I've got a ball game tomorrow night." And God is not gonna, like He said in the movie, 700 million people, each one $1. And God could do it, but He's not going to do it that way.
And then it comes back to whether I respect who God is and His ability to sort through what's really necessary in those circumstances. Go ahead, Sarah.
It makes me think about what Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane. Yet not my will, but yours be done.
Yeah. And that's why it's in His model prayer, and it's what He exemplifies in His prayer in the garden. That at the end of all of it, I will respect the will of God in whatever manner He chooses to address my concerns. And within that, I will not lose faith in prayer because God said the Chaldeans are coming. I'll not lose my confidence in my Creator just because His answer was, I'm sending a bunch of horsemen that can fly like an eagle to come down and bring judgment. Just because the answer may seem more severe than I ever imagined, I will not lose my faith in prayer. And I'll continue to pray and trust in Him that if He decided horsemen that can fly like eagles was what was necessary, then that's what was necessary. Thy will be done. And that's the hard part. Thy will be done is an easy phrase to say. It's a hard phrase to live by. But Jesus isn't saying, that's why we talk about this isn't formalized prayer. This is pattern and model for us. But formalized would just say it without thought. But when I say thy will be done, I would hope that I mean it. And whatever His response or reaction is, that I'll embrace.
What if one of us, well, we all prayed Habakkuk's prayer, and God said, okay, you're not going to like what I'm going to do. You wouldn't believe it, but I'm going to send Muslim terrorists in your country, and we're going to wipe you out.
And the hard part about, and the difference and the challenge of all those kinds of things for me, Mo, has always been, is the benefit Habakkuk had was he's having some very direct conversations with the Creator, which I don't have access to. And that's the difficulty. But that is not to say that God can choose whatever means He desires to deal with men in whatever fashion He chooses. And it wouldn't be my role necessarily to try to question whatever God would choose. Any other thoughts?
Judy made the statement that our prayers are sometimes selfish.
Yeah.
But who else do you have to go to?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you ask for the best thing for whatever, a sickness or whatever, but you don't have anybody else to ask. You don't have anybody else to give you any comfort or relief.
The New Testament writers say that we shouldn't pray to consume it with our bellies. So if I'm praying for whatever it is I want just so that I can consume it for my own selfish, ambitious reasons, don't bother. But yet it all is personal. It's all personal when we pray before Him. And you're right. At times there's nobody else to talk to about it. At least nobody else that has any ability to do anything in relationship to a lot of the things that we're addressing. And we're depending on Him in relationship to that.
We're wrong then if we pray for physical things.
Well, Jabez or Jabez or however you want to say, he did. So if that, and God granted it, so it seems like a positive passage. So I think there's an example And others, Paul prayed for positive things in relationship to his thorn in the flesh. It wasn't the answer he got, but he was praying for it. Jesus prayed for positive things. So I think the example of that, the idea is not that we're not allowed to. The example, the lesson is, if we don't get the answer we like, don't quit on God and don't give up on prayer just because of it. That's the lesson in all that. Go ahead, Judy.
3 John 2. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers.
Yeah. And so there's a desire that John has as an apostle that obviously we can be appreciative of, and in some senses bring those thoughts before the throne of God as well.
Brian, too, we see examples of, with David when he's presented with his sin with Uriah. God basically says, I would have given you anything you asked for. All you had to do was ask. So it's not that we're not supposed to ask. It's not that our prayers aren't supposed to be personal. I don't know how you could pray without it being personal. I mean, if your children come to you and ask for something, they're asking for something personal. It comes down to, hey, Dad, I need a new pair of shoes, versus, hey, I need a new pair of shoes to go with the 12 other ones I have in my closet that I'm never going to wear. It's what it is versus that. I mean, I've prayed for personal things and received them. There's other times you don't.
Well, and you got me thinking about shoes. Lord willing, we'll come back. See, I left you alone. I could really pounce on that.
I opened it right up.
Yeah, I almost walked through that door. All right, we'll start. But I didn't have any shoes. We'll start right there and start looking at these other texts. I did want to spend some time in Habakkuk, and so that we spend all of our time there, that's okay with me. So let's move on, Lord willing, on Sunday, and we'll look at these other texts and talk about some of the times that God has basically told us, I'm not going to listen if these are the conditions. And then how we learn from those moments where we hear no and those moments where we hear just hang on.